Now what's interesting is even if you take the time to establish your values, your behavioural standards, and that goes quite well, most teams go through what we call a storming stage. And obviously that's when teams start to do what? You ever notice that the honeymoon is over at one point in time and all of a sudden you turn up to practice and what are your players doing? They've actually started behaving according to their, what we would define as their natural style. They've started showing their true colours, exactly. And we already have expressions to define these behaviours. We call it true colours, we call it tiptoeing around each other, but they start to show their true colours, and what happens when people start to show their true colours? You sometimes get what we define as perhaps a personality clash, where people start to, oh, maybe they don't like that about someone else. And so that's going to happen. As well as that, what if you define someone's role? What if you've selected the leadership group, and maybe some people aren't so happy about that, or maybe they didn't voice it initially, but they would have really liked to have been in that leadership group, but they're not. And now they're a little bit upset about that, and a little bit frustrated, or maybe they don't think some of the leaders have got enough credibility, and they feel secure enough in their environment that now they start showing, okay, a little bit of their frustration. They start voicing their disapproval about things. Now, is this a good thing or not? What do you think? It happens. Whether it's good or bad, it actually happens. Now, what if, let's say, what if you don't deal with it? Like what if, like I said before, you're one of those conflict-averse coaches? What if your focus is on cohesion, is on relationships, and you've got to be that style of coach, but what if you don't address this behaviour? It'll fester, okay? Now, conflict is a really positive thing if it's managed in an effective way. Okay, if we can keep referring back to what our absolute goals, values, behaviours are, if we can create that level of alignment where people start to appreciate the fact that, is it good if we're different? Like if you've got a team of athletes, do you actually want them to be the same or do you want them to be different? What do you think? You actually want them to be different. Okay, now what happens if you get a team of non-diverse athletes? Well, basically you've got a team of athletes, whether they all have a similar skill set, whether they all have a different or a similar outlook on situations, strategies, problems. So diversity always creates a better outcome. It may be a little bit painful in getting there. Now the other side is this, imagine you're going through this storming stage. And you as a coach are the type of coach that, well, you can deal with conflict. In fact, you didn't make that transition from the forming stage to the storming in terms of being directive, being fairly autocratic, and there is a time and a place for that. But what if you can't take your hands off the reins to a degree and let your players start to sort some of these issues out themselves? What if you're the type of coach that steps in and deals with everything? What do you think happens? The players don't actually learn to do it themselves. Have you ever seen that happen? And so the players don't learn these vital skills of conflict management, of appreciating diversity. All right. And, you know, in a lot of the work that we do, we're often talking to coaches about the fact that, what is your role as a coach? Is your role as a coach specifically to teach a player how to kick and pass a football? Or does it extend beyond that? You know, are you the type of coach that teaches life skills? Are you the type of coach that can help an athlete understand their leadership style? You know, the type of coach that help an athlete understand how to be a great team member for the team? Because if all you're doing is teaching players how to kick and pass a football, we're missing a massive opportunity. And I'm pretty certain that most coaches here would be on board with that because we've done a lot of work in the AFL, and from our perspective, you know, your sport is one of the most progressive sports in the country. Like when I present at the AFL Level 3 conference in Melbourne each year, you know, they're talking about things that just go way beyond the actual technique and strategies of the game. And so in many ways, your sport is in a really good shape with that. Okay. Now, if we get through this storming stage, and let's keep in mind that a lot of teams don't, and you can always tell which ones don't, because at the end of the season, once again, what happens? When it's all said and done, the team starts basically imploding. Finger pointing goes on, people start blaming each other, there's a massive reshuffle, and then there are other teams that, you know, build for the next year. All right, now the next one is the norming stage. Now at this stage, obviously we're through the storming stage, and the players actually start appreciating that diversity that was once a bit of a challenge to deal with is actually a positive thing. And they start knowing that perhaps my limitations are overcome by someone else's on the team. Maybe it's their strengths, which can help us be a stronger group in terms of subscribing to those values and behaviours and really starting to align themselves to that team identity. What happens to your performance if you get to this stage? Where's it starting to go? It's actually improving, isn't it? All right, so at that forming stage, you can actually start off at a reasonable level. When you go through storming, morale drops, spirit levels drop, the performance goes down, and then as you start going through the norming stage, it starts coming back up. Some of the common things here, as it says, commitment and unity is stronger, the team engages in fun and social activities, and the thing you start noticing is that the team is starting to really effectively, manage itself. If you've got a leadership group, the leadership group starts to manage those little disciplinary issues within the team. And team members understand what are the consequences of stepping outside of those behavioural frameworks, and they cop it. They're happy with that. Okay. Now the final stage is this, which very few teams really get to. Final stage is when you really are achieving a level of what we call synergy. Now synergy is defined as, when you add up, if you think about a rowing crew, for example, because it's a small number of people, 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 4. There were 4 of them. 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 4, right? Now, what if it did equal 3? Would you have a high-performing team? No, you wouldn't, would you? You may have a team which is perhaps caught in the storming stage, or maybe even worse. Okay, maybe you didn't even get through that stage. But what if it adds up to 4? Is that a high-performing team? What do you think? Like a high-performing team, is that going to win you a premiership? If just your sum total of your players is the sum of the individual total? Or what are you hoping for? You're hoping that 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 does not equal 4, it equals 5 or 5.5, or if it's a really phenomenal team, maybe it equals 6. And the ultimate measure of synergy is, think about it this way, most teams have a star player, don't they? Now, does the star player outperform the team? Now, in your sport, you can measure every player's stats. Now, does the star player, do they happen to kick a stack of goals, but the team still loses? And do they do that consistently? Because if the star player outperforms the team, your team is not achieving synergy. And so synergy is defined when the team outperforms the best individual. And that's a pretty rarefied position to be in. You could probably argue that certainly the teams that win the premiership each year, I think they get there. Would you suggest? And usually that's the defining factor. That's the defining factor. And so at this stage, you can see here that it's not that conflict doesn't occur. Like if you've got a team that never has any conflict, what sort of team do you have? You've probably got a team that does not have honest conversations with each other. I mean, think about it that way. They've defined success in organisations. When they study the most successful corporate organisations in the world, they find that the most successful organisations are the ones who have team members who are willing to have what they call a critical or a crucial or a real conversation with another team member. And that's a tough conversation. It's a conversation that you probably don't want to have, but why do you have it? Because it's in the best interest of the team. And so that foundation of honesty, that foundation of trust, this is what typically high-performing teams all have. What's really interesting is that all of the work that we do, we get to see, as I mentioned before, we get to see teams that are really successful, whether that's winning, National Collegiate Athletic Association, NCAA championships, Olympic gold medals, AFL championships, NRL championships, whatever the case may be. But one thing which defines those teams, it's the one thing that successful teams never talk about. It's the one thing that unsuccessful teams always talk about. What do you think it is? The word begins with T. Trust. Think about a really successful team that you've been part of. I bet you never spoke about, we really trust each other. It's just implied, it's involved, it's implicit in every single thing that you do. Does that make sense? If you've got a great relationship with someone, the reason will be is because you have massive trust with them. But it's something that you don't talk about. It's just there. Yet what is interesting is that teams that aren't successful, the key thing they talk about is defining their lack of success is, oh, we just didn't trust each other. And that trust needs to be re-established from one year to the next. We've worked with teams that have been successful one year and not the next. And the key factor that they've spoken about is the lack of trust. What does that look like on a football field? What does a lack of trust look like on a football field? Well, yeah, it looks like what? It means a player holds the ball too long because they don't trust that the other player is going to do their job. You know, it means that a player tries to do too much because they don't trust that the other people around them are going to do their job. You know, in some sports, it literally looks like you're playing in a very mechanical way. You know, it lacks flow. You know, and it's the same in every sport. It'll manifest itself in some way. You know, if you talk about rugby league, a team that trusts each other, they pass the ball without even looking because they know that that person's going to be there. All right, the support play is phenomenal. Everything that happens, especially in your sport, off the ball, which is a big part of your game, well, players are doing their job and everyone trusts that they're going to do their job. And that's one of the key things, which is defining a team which hits that stage of performing. Okay, so look, today is an overview of this model, and I've given you a stack of notes which you can carry along with and have a look at, but that's basically it. Hopefully you can relate to that, because I want to just share the next important model that we use when we work with a team. I mentioned this study before. The first 15% leads to the possibility. It doesn't guarantee it, but it leads to the possibility of you achieving the remaining 85. And look, in most sports, if you achieve the remaining, maybe not 85, but 84%, maybe 83, that itself will be good enough to win. You know, at the Olympics it's not. You know, at the highest level of any sport it's not, but you're probably going to get a lot closer to it than what many of the other teams that you might be competing against are. Okay. So it's all about this foundation. Now, the model we use is this. So I want to just take you through this because we find it's a useful way of, once again, structuring your season. Now, by the way, the time that you would use this model is at the very beginning of the season. Preferably, when we work with a team, it's before a ball has been kicked. It's before a ball has been passed. It's before a stroke has been taken. It's before anything has happened. So we're big on the fact that if we're going to get off on the right setting, on the right foot, we need to structure our foundation before anything has happened. Okay? So it's pretty basic. If you think about this, when a team underperforms, one of these elements is either missing completely, at least one, or it has been poorly defined. So for that example, we use goals. Now, we extrapolate that into more than just the goals, but when we talk about a goal, we're actually talking about, well, what is the material outcome that you're looking to achieve from your season? Now, I know a lot of coaches. A lot of coaches don't like to talk about, well, I mean, I did read in the paper today that, you know, a certain club that is very close to us right now has spoken about their goals for the upcoming 3 years. You know, you have to define your goals in a very materialistic way. You know, there has to be symbolism attached to them. You know, everyone has to know what that standard is. Now, the important thing about saying that you want to win the premiership, okay, it only needs to be spoken about a couple of times, but then you quickly have to start thinking about, well, how are we going to do that? It has to quickly go into process.